Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Round the Table. We are into chapter 14 of Mark, so we're into the final stretch. So without any more ado, Edmund, could you read Mark 14, 17 to 26, please?
26.
Oh, no, that is not the one. No, sorry, that's not the one. Let me find. Where's my document one gone?
That was 17.
It was 17. Where were we? No, sorry, that is correct.
Yeah.
My apologies. That is right. That's where we were last week.
Yeah. Okay. When evening came, Yeshua arrived with the 12. As they were reclining and eating, Yeshua said, "Absolutely, I tell you, one of you is going to betray me." They became upset and began asking him one after the other, "You don't mean me, do you?" "It's one of the 12, he said to them, "someone dipping matzah in the dish with me. For the Son of Man will die just as the Tanakh says he will. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for him had he never been born." And while they were eating, Yeshua took a piece of matzah, made the blessing, broke it, gave it to them and said, "Take it, this is my body." Also, he took a cup of wine, made the blessing and gave it to them, and they all drank. He said to them, "This is my blood, which ratifies the new covenant, my blood shed on behalf of many people. Absolutely, I tell you, I will not drink the fruit of the vine again until the day I drink new wine in the kingdom of God." After singing the Hallel, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Yeshua said to them,
That's great. Just there, Edmund, to 26.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay.
Don't worry. You're in enthusiastic full flow. So we talked about the Jesus sending the disciples into the city last week and looking for the man with the jar of water, carrying the jar of water, and he took them to an upper room where they could prepare the Passover. Now, we did have a discussion, didn't we, Edmund, about who was actually at that Passover meal. And it just came to me as you were reading, in beginning of verse 20, he says, "It is one of the 12, he replied." So that would possibly indicate there were more than the 12 there.
Yeah, I think so.
Because otherwise it would just say it wouldn't need to say, because he's already said, "One of you will betray me." If it was only the 12, then it would be self-explanatory.
Yeah.
So yeah, that to me would indicate that there were more than the 12 at the Last Supper. Edmund, have you anything?
No, that's one of the reasons why I've wondered about it, and I always wonder, where are the women? There are normally women at a Passover and whatnot, and I do want to see the replay when I get to heaven, because I'm really curious about that. And
I don't think it would have looked like Leonardo's, would it? Because they were all reclining. They weren't sitting around. And they used to sit round one of those curved tables. What was it called? A triclinium or something?
Yeah. And curiously, the host, he doesn't sit in the middle. He sits not the end one, but the one in, so that the person next to him on one side will be John. And interestingly enough, the person who sits on the other side of him will be Judas. And the person who sits directly opposite John will be down at the end, and that'll be Peter, who would normally, if there wasn't somebody else, be expected to do the washing of the feet, believe it or not.
How do you come with that alignment around the table?
I've got a whole thing on it. It's fascinating. At that time, you would be in groups that you would be set up in. You'd have a bowl between three where you would dip the things. And so if he gives it to Judas, that means, and that would make sense that the beloved one would sit on one side of him. There's always a special, and in fact, being the other side of him as Judas, that also implies it's a particular privileged position. But if it's the person that dips the matzah with him, normally at that time, most experts say you had a bowl between three, because if you're reclining, you can't reach very far. You can only use the one hand, you see. And so you have bowls situated on the triclinium for each three people. But Peter would have been directly across from John and therefore can say to him, ask him who it is, which we know.
I don't disagree with you. I'm just really curious how you know that Peter was opposite him and Judas was on his.
Well, this is one of the frustrations. If I could play a clip, I'd show you it. I've got it all, and it's very, very powerful when he explains it all, and so much stuff that you don't realise suddenly drops into place.
Okay. And I'm just fascinated.
Well, it's one of the ironies of life. I tried ages ago to try to get you. You were going to watch a series of videos I'd got because you were up and down in the train, but something happened and you never were able to. So you're one of the few people who have not. I've not been able to get to watch Ray van der Laan, and that's all where that comes from. I think you've frozen, Simon. How do we let him know?
Anybody got his phone number?
Isn't there words you can? Isn't there a messaging thing there?
I've just sent him a message. Oh, he's gone. He'll come back. Edmund, I'm just wondering how do we know that the Jews and those Jews who were more lowly, like Jesus and his disciples, not the temple gang, how do we know that they followed Roman customs and sat round tricliniums and reclined?
The triclinium bit, the reclining at the Passover is a particular thing because the high-ups did this, not the ordinary people.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the Passover, you always recline because it's a way of saying we are no longer slaves in Egypt. We can now recline. Most of the year, you would not be reclining when you eat, but you always recline for the Passover.
Okay.
It's even part of the Passover today. They at least talk about it, even if they're not reclining. It's in the Haggadah, the form for the Passover. It's spoken of as part of the Passover. You're muted.
Sorry, Janet. Apparently, you're the host. Did you know that? I've just looked at the part. You might need to let Simon back in. So if you click on the word participants. You're muted as well, but you might need to let him in. So if you click on the participants and scroll, can you see him in the waiting room waiting?
No.
Apparently you are the host, according.
He's probably made me host because it's not working, so I guess we need to carry on then. Edmund, over to you.
I can't do it from here. You see where it says participants?
You can't read the next bit for us to
talk. At the bottom of the screen, can you see the bottom of the screen where it says participants?
Yeah, but I think I can't let him in.
If you click on there, if you click on participants, the little bit to the side of participants, it will drop down and you'll see who's in the waiting room.
But he's not. He's not there, Edmund.
Oh.
So I think either we carry on. Oh, here he comes. Hold on. I don't know how you let him in though. He's hosting now, so he's coming back.
Hello.
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 Sorry about that, everybody. I have no idea what happened.
You disappeared.
Yeah. I'm glad you're all still there, because I wasn't quite sure, as I'm the host, I wasn't sure whether they would kick you all out.
Well, you made me the host.
Oh, did it? Oh, I made you as I did it previously.
It had me as host. This is all going to be recorded now.
Yeah.
It had me as host, but I couldn't. You weren't there, so I couldn't let you in.
Yeah, I'm terribly sorry. I think my internet disappeared for a season.
To shut this out of the recording, then.
Oh well, it is what it is. I'll watch the recording to see what you were saying about me when I wasn't there. Edmund, you were in mid-flight when I suddenly wasn't. When I suddenly disappeared, so I'm not sure.
Olivia asked a question about how we know that the Jews did this business with the triclinium and whatnot, and I was just explaining that it's always, although they may sit in very different ways most of the time, always for Passover, you recline. It's part of the whole Passover thing, because it's saying we are no longer slaves. We can recline like the rich people do.
All right, yeah. Yeah, because when they did the first Passover, they ate it standing up, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
So it's, that was a difference. So the commentator says that Passover was observed as a night of watching unto the Lord, in the conviction that in that night they were redeemed, and in that night they will be redeemed in the future, which is a quote from a Targum. And he goes on to say, Jesus came to the city fully aware that he was to accomplish the Passover in his own person. So the Jews were recognizing the history of having been redeemed from Egypt, but also that in the Passover night they will be redeemed in the future. And Jesus was going to be the fulfillment of that. So, which I thought was interesting. And the dipping in the bitter herbs and stewed fruit apparently references Psalm 41, verse 9, which actually doesn't. It's not that bit. It's referencing the person who betrays him. It says, "Even my close friend whom I trusted, he who shared my bread has lifted up his heel against me." So that's yeah. I'm not quite sure where I got the bitter herbs. So Edmund, do you want to talk anything about?
Yeah, I was just looking for something itself when you said about watching, because I think I've got it on this. I'm just having a look to see if I can find it. Because, you know, Jesus says, "Could you not watch with me 1 hour?"
Mm-hmm.
That's because it was a tradition. If I find it, I will. Watching. I thought I put it on this. Let's have a look. Well, I'll do my own version of it. There's a rabbinic tradition that on the following Passover, you deny yourself, and people, it's called a watch night, and it goes back, I think, to Exodus 12. Actually, I can check that. If I just bring that up, let's just have a look. Seem to remember it's Exodus 12. Let me just. What it is that one of these legends, you know, these rabbinic legends about there they are jubilating about having And God says, why are you rejoicing when my children are dying? Because of course he is also the God of they're his children too, even if, and that was the price for their freedom, was the death of all these other people. And so it has become a tradition among pious Jews that Passover night, you stay awake, which is what a watch is. You have watch night services in the more traditional churches, or if you remember back in the days of nights, they would they would be in the chapel all night before the altar. They were watching before they left to go on crusade or whatever, or there was a battle. So it was part of, and so there is this tradition. So when he says to Peter, could you not watch with me 1 hour? It's because that is the tradition, that you do not sleep. You reflect on what it has cost to give you your freedom and how grateful you are to God, and you honor the Egyptians even. But I can't find the, I'll hunt it about a bit later on, and I'll see if I can find it. I know a place where it will be.
The watch, it's got quite, it's the Catholics do that, don't they? The priest blesses the sacrament on a Wednesday, and then there's the, what's it called? Something the host. Contemplating the host. Contemplating the host.
Yes.
And I talked to one of my neighbours in Bath, she's Catholic, and down at the Catholic church in town, they do this. They do contemplating the host, and the priest, at least there were a couple of years ago, the priest blesses the sacrament, and then it's kind of placed in a special container in a little chapel, and then people come in and pray through from Wednesday evening through until Saturday night, when they start to use it for the Saturday Mass and then the Sunday Mass. And there's people 24 hours a day praying in this chapel, thanking Jesus for his sacrifice.
Yeah.
And I thought it was incredible. Our church talks about, our church types talk about, doing 24/7 prayer. Well, in Bath, the Catholics are already doing half the week, 24 hours a day anyway. So they're doing the heavy lifting. And I remember those of you who knew Tony Palmer, I stayed out in Italy with him, and we went to Assisi and went to the cathedral there. And then there's a prayer chapel down in the basement where they obviously carry this out. But Tony said, "Oh yeah, this is the Catholics' IHOP." And I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" He said, "Oh, well, the 24/7 prayer that IHOP instigated it here in America." And I said, "Oh," he said, "Oh yeah, the Catholics have been doing 24/7 prayer here for 700 years."
Yeah.
What?
That verse, by the way, Exodus 12:42. Start at 41. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. That, by the way, is 430 years since God's promise to Abraham. You will be a sojourner in the land and you'll be enslaved. It's from that promise to when they come out of Egypt, 430 years.
Wow.
And then it said, it was a night of watching by the Lord to bring them out of the land of Egypt. So this same night is a night of watching kept to the Lord by all the people of Israel throughout their generations. So when Jesus talks about watching, that's what he's talking about. That's Exodus 12:42.
So on the bread and the wine, the commentator says something. He said, the word concerning the bread simply promises that Jesus will be with his followers going forward. But Jesus saying, relating to the cup with the red wine, relates to the renewal of the covenant between God and his people. And this is the new covenant that Jeremiah talks about in Jeremiah 31, which is the very famous one that you'll all know. Jeremiah 31, 31 to 33, which is, the time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their forefathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they brought my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. So this is the institution of that covenant during this meal. And then I thought, when Jesus says that he won't drink of this cup again, the commentator says the cup from which Jesus abstained was the fourth cup, which ordinarily concluded the Passover fellowship. The significance of this can be appreciated from the fact that the 4 cups of wine were interpreted in terms of the fourfold promise of redemption set forth in Exodus 6:67. The first being, I will bring you out. The second being, I will rid you of your bondage. The third being, I will redeem you. And this was the cup that Jesus said was the new covenant. So this is the redemption. And then the fourth was, I will take you for my people and I will be your God. Jesus had used the third cup associated with the promise of redemption to refer to his atoning death on behalf of the elect community. The cup which he refused was the cup of confirmation associated with the promise that God will take his people to be with him. This is the cup which Jesus will drink with his own in the messianic banquet, which incorporates the unfinished Passover meal will be completed when Messiah eats with the redeemed sinners in the kingdom of God. That's the big picture, isn't it? Any thoughts on that, Edmund?
Yeah, it's often called the cup of judgment as well, and I'm trying to remember how it works. The fact that he does not drink it means that judgment will fall upon him, is how I think that it's taken, so that that fits in with the redemption of the one before, and there are differences through history about the cups and the number of cups and how they're seen among the Jews, but the cup of judgment, which he does not take, which means that judgment will fall upon him.
So they didn't actually finish the Passover, did they? It looks like they didn't eat the lamb. Would they have eaten the lamb before that?
It's sort of, if you're at a Passover, it all happens. Now you tend to put the meal later on, but they would have eaten the lamb.
Yes, they would, yeah. Yes, because the third cup comes after the lamb.
After the lamb, yes, after the main meal.
Yeah. And then they sang the hymns, which is Psalms 116 to 118, the Hallel Psalms. So anybody got any comments on that passage before we look at the next one?
Do we think that we said there was more than 12 people there?
We think so, yeah.
Yeah. So would we expected them all to share the same cup, or have the cup passed around and bread? Jesus distribute bread to all of them equally?
It's conjecture, isn't it? But
the traditions vary quite a lot even now between whether you have your own cup, everybody has their own cup, or whether in some parts, it's shared more. It's trying to fix exactly how it was done in all its details at different times in Jewish history is a real sort of bag of worms, or whatever you call it, because it varies between Ashkenazi and Sephardi, and which century you're in, and people say this about the first century and other people say that. You know, it's I mean, one of the things I find very interesting is that the bread, which you have 3 of folded into a napkin, it's they're sort of like scored and pierced, these pieces of bread. And if you ask Jewish rabbis, why is it like this? Nobody knows. And the comment often goes, the Messiah will explain. But there are at least grounds for wondering whether it was the Messianic Jews who introduced that part into the Passover, because there's no mention of it being pierced or scored before the first century. But it does turn up later. So some people have suggested that's the influence of the Christians, and the Jews take it every year without realizing this is a witness to Jesus, which of course Messianic Jews always read it that way.
Yes. I think it's just going back to the beginning of the passage. I think it's fascinating that Jesus says someone's going to betray him, and they were saddened and say, surely not me. But they don't seem to give it too much import, do they?
I think the thing is that the word is not actually betray. It means to give over to, and you could do that by making a mistake, and that makes much better sense. Oh dear, am I going to do something that's going to mess all this up? Because it doesn't mean betray. We're very used to using the word betray, but it means to cause to be handed over or delivered up, the actual word itself.
Do you think Jesus perhaps didn't realise what he was doing, really? Do you see what I mean? Do you think he was, he had no... I mean, did he really know that Jesus was going to be killed, do you think, or suspected that?
Yeah, when we get to that passage, I'm pretty sure that the commentator says that to try and work out why he did that, Judas did that, is it just doesn't say in Scripture what he was thinking, what he was trying to achieve. I mean, there's all sorts of theories, that he was trying to force Jesus's hand to declare himself. But whatever it was, it obviously didn't play out as Judas expected, because he hangs himself, doesn't he?
But it did work out exactly as Jesus expected.
Yes. Yeah, it worked out exactly as Jesus expected, but not as Judas expected, I would imagine. But we don't know why Judas decided to do it. Did he get disillusioned? Was he trying to force Jesus's hand?
The fact that he hanged himself suggests that he maybe didn't expect that Jesus would be killed, and when it came to that, he was just dismayed. Do you think that could be an explanation?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's it could be that he was trying to force Jesus's hand, because even at this point, the disciples were still expecting Messiah to look like someone who became a leader in the country and kicked out the Romans, and
military leader.
Because you get the guys on the road to Emmaus saying, we would have expected that he would have done this, and now this is what happened, and now these women have come and said they've... Do you know that bit? They're saying, we expected that he was the one who was going to free Israel. So they're thinking that even at that point.
Well, even, we're planning to move into Acts after we've done Mark. I'm now studying Acts. But even there, when it's talking about before Jesus' ascension, they say to him, even this is after the resurrection, after they've had 40 days of teaching, they still say to him, at this time, are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel? So even after the crucifixion and the resurrection and 40 days more teaching from Jesus, they still were looking for the same thing, which is quite staggering, really, isn't it?
I mean, it does make me feel rather, people say, oh, the Jews didn't recognize Jesus and tut, and all that sort of thing. And I think, look, the disciples had incredible problems processing it all. So I'm not going to hit people over the head because they don't recognize Jesus as Messiah. We say it's all very clear. Well, it's clear to us because we're looking from this side.
Yeah, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I always have it would be wrong to say I have a soft spot for Judas, but I've always sort of thought about him and worried about him because, Jesus, I saw a documentary last night about the guy who played the Lord in Downton Abbey. I keep forgetting his name.
Oh, Hugh Bonneville.
Yeah, he did a documentary looking at the last week. Why was Jesus crucified?
Yeah, we saw that.
You saw that. Yeah. And although I got a little worked up at certain points, he actually turned out he did theology to begin with before he became an actor. And he actually was really into it, wasn't he?
He was, yeah.
And I mean, you hear some of the notions about Judas. I knew about that novel, by the way, that they talked about. Yeah. But, Jesus says quite clearly it would be better for that man had he never been born. So all those ideas that it was a put-up job between Jesus and Judas, Jesus needed somebody to act as a guy to betray him. And there are so many different versions. And like Simon says, it's not, you can't work it out. We can hypothesize this, that, and the other, but that's why I always feel sorry for him.
It's just a shame that the Christian community over the centuries has simply vilified Judas and looked at him as a totally evil person, a tool of Satan. That's a default position, isn't it? And of course, we actually don't know. It seems to be rather unfair on Judas, isn't it?
Well, actually, he was a tool of God because, as Edmund said, whilst it may not have worked out as Judas expected, it worked out as Jesus expected.
Exactly, yeah.
And he was only doing what he saw the Father do. And so Judas was actually a tool of God.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of the things that cropped up in this documentary. I mean, I do know that certain Christian sects some centuries ago, they're still around, a few of them in somewhere in the Middle East, who treat Judas as a saint, because if it had not been for Judas, we could not have been saved, which came out in that documentary that I watched last night, But I take those sorts of statements as a bit of semantics.
Well, they ought to make Pontius Pilate a Satan, oughtn't they, if they're going to follow that logic?
I think there is somewhere where he's seen positively. I think there is you've got some very quirky things in the 7th century where all sorts of weird things going on with very scrambled up Christians.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble is where do you stop? Because then you've got St. Caiaphas, haven't you? And it's, I mean, at the end of the day, it was God's plan, but it was, the people who crucified Jesus were following Satan's agenda. I think probably Satan just didn't understand what he was doing, because if we're talking about things that we've got no idea about. But if you were Satan, that was really a known goal, wasn't it?
So you've got in verse 21, Jesus saying it would be better for him if he'd not been born. So he was culpable, isn't he?
Yeah. I don't think you can turn him into a positive when you see that line.
This is the thing, we're all culpable.
Jesus could have been meaning that, he was going to be vilified. He didn't say, Jesus wasn't implying that was, a fair judgment on that he should never have been born. It was more a simple statement of fact, perhaps, that he was going to be vilified throughout history, which of course he has been by Christians.
I mean, at the end of the day, we are all responsible for our own actions, aren't we? And the devil made me do it is not an excuse.
I have wondered.
We made us do it.
In a gloomier minute, why are we so fascinated with, because down through history, there's been so much said about Judas. And it struck me that in a way, being fallen human beings, we can actually find it easier to identify with, we recognize in ourselves at some level a Judas rather more easily than we do a Jesus.
Well, I think we probably relate to the next passage which we come up to, which is the Peter who denied him. Should we segue into that passage, Edmund? So
okay.
Let me just get so could you do Mark 14:27 to 31, please?
20, let me see where we are. 27
to 31.
To 31. Oh, here we are. Yeshua said to them, "You will all lose faith in me, for the Tanakh says, I will strike the shepherd dead, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go ahead of you into the Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even if everybody lose faith in you, I won't." Jesus replied, "Absolutely, I tell you that this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But Peter kept insisting, "Even if I must die with you, I will never disown you." And they all said the same thing.
Thank you, Edmund. So they leave the city, they go out of town, heading towards the Garden of Gethsemane. And bless him, Peter. I think the Bible's an incredible document that it just doesn't turn people into heroes. If you just think, it really does air everybody's dirty washing all the way through. It's an incredible document that all the people who would be heroes of the faith, you get to read about their weakest failures. It's an amazing thing. I think, people who don't understand the Bible and think it's, all just made up. I mean, if you were going to make it up and you were, in the early church and Jesus was dead and gone and hadn't been resurrected, and you were the lead disciple, and there for everybody to see is all your failure as the head of the church, it's incredible. You just wouldn't do it, would you? If you were making it up, you would cast yourself as the great hero, Peter. That's why you've got to follow me, not the guy who's got a big mouth but keeps failing. It's a staggering document, staggering. Now the quote about the scattered disciples, let's see if I've got the right reference here, is Zechariah. Zechariah 13, 7-9. It says, "Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who is close to me, declares the Lord Almighty. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered, and I will turn my hand against the little ones." And it says that God's command to the shepherds, the man who stands next to me, to be struck down, that the sheep may be scattered is an integral part of a refining process which will result in the creation of a new people of God. So this is, from Zechariah, the scattering of the sheep is part of that refining process, but the final result is the creation of a new people of God, which, any thoughts on that, Edmund?
I understand the point, but in the thrust of what Jesus has been saying here, I think it just, there will be saying, and what goes on, oh no, we wouldn't leave you. No, Jesus is saying, no, this is one of the bottom points. I'm going to be struck and you guys are going to be all over the place. And I think he's saying that. I don't think he's talking about what the commentator was just saying, although that's perfectly valid. But I think the thrust of this moment is it's all going to start to come unravel, guys. And you're going to be scattered all over the place.
Yeah, I think, but everything that happened in this whole, in the whole death and resurrection of Jesus, it was patterned in the Old Testament. And sorry, I didn't actually finish the whole, quote from Zechariah. So it says, strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered, and I will turn my hand against the little ones in the whole land, declares the Lord. 2/3 will be struck down and perish, yet the 1/3 will be left in it. This third I will bring into the fire. I will refine them like silver and test them like gold. They will call on my name and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is our God. So I just think everything that happened to Jesus is echoed in the Old Testament prophetically. Commentator says, Jesus' word emphasizes once again that every time he speaks about his passion, he provokes a crisis for the disciples.
Yeah.
The disciples always fix on the first part of the prophecy, I must die, and ignore the following, and be raised.
Yeah.
And apparently the third of the 4 Roman night watchers was designated cockcrow. And where is it? Hang on a minute. Let me just have a look at my notes, because actually there is a very specific calculation as to when between the second and third crowing of the cock is, but we'll do that when we actually get to to where it is recorded, because I've got notes on it. It's amazing. They do know exactly what the time was between the second and the third cock crow in Jerusalem at that time, bizarrely. Any questions, thoughts on this, apart from blessing Peter?
Yeah, for me, I don't really understand why the disciples didn't say, okay, so what can we do so we don't end up there?
Yeah.
Well, that's why I think that we're so used to this idea of betraying, and I think they're taking it in a much more, oh good heavens, am I going to slip up and do something that is going to cause the problem? Not thinking of it as an intentional thing, but, they're young guys, so I think that would answer your question,
And they were probably all like Peter. It says, but Peter insisted emphatically, even if I have to die with you, bravado, I will never disown you. And all the others said the same. Like Edmund says, they were all young guys. So they'd have been all, bravado, we're all in our group together, we're with Jesus.
Well, you believe it when you say it, don't you?
Yeah.
And when you hit real life, it sort of catches you off guard and you discover you're not like you thought you were.
Yeah, in the middle of the night when you're, everyone's scattered and the soldiers have taken him and you're being questioned there and then in front of a fire by someone, that's when the rubber hits the road.
I did come across something which made me think, where they said, you know, the disciples falling asleep, and you think, oh dear, what, he's told them to stay awake, you know. But they're saying Passover is an extremely long day, and the Passover meal takes a long time, and you've been eating and you've been drinking wine, and then you stagger off to find somewhere to sleep. They are very tired by this point. So when the people arrive, wake up, you guys, the time's come, says Jesus. And they're getting up out of sleep and they don't quite know what's going on and they don't know what's happening. You haven't got time to think about it. I often find where I slip up is where if I can see it coming, I can think of the right answer or the right response. But when somebody renowned in my memory, someone just walks up to me and says, I've got to leave the site, you better look after this, sticks a joint without, in a blink of an eye, in my mouth. I had just stopped smoking dope because the Lord had got hold of me. This guy wanders up, an old friend, sticks a joint in my mouth, and he's put a match to it before I can think. Had I thought about it before, I would have thought of how to handle this. But you weren't given the time to think about this. And I learned a very big lesson. You've got to be aware of these things so that, you know, if something like this happens, how do you handle it?
I don't think we're going to finish this passage, but let's read the next passage, Edmund. Mark 14:32 to 42. I don't think we'll get to finish discussing it, but
Mark 40.
14.
Yeah, I was getting confused there.
Yeah, sorry, chapter 14:32 to 42.
Okay. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Yeshua said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took with him Peter, James, and John. Great distress and anguish came over him, and he said to them, my heart is so filled with sadness that I could die. Remain here and stay awake. Going on a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if it might be possible, the hour could pass from him. Abba, that is, dear Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Still, not what I want, but what you want. He came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you stay awake 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you will not be put to the test. The spirit indeed is eager, but human nature is weak. Again he went away and prayed, saying the same words, and again he came and found them sleeping. Their eyes were so very heavy, and they didn't know what to answer him.
Have you got 41 and 42 there, Edmund, as well?
Oh, you want 42 as well? I was going to stop at 40, sorry. The third time he came and said to them, for now go on sleeping, take your rest. There, that's enough. The time's come. Look, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let's go. Here comes my betrayer.
Excellent. Thank you, Edmund. So, apparently in the ancient world it was customary to pray aloud, so the commentator says. Now Peter, James and John had all declared they were willing to drink the same cup as Jesus. Now they were exposed to what that looked like. So and interestingly, these are the same three who were at the Transfiguration, aren't they, Edmund?
Yeah.
And again, you know, it says that they did not know what to say to him, and they did not know what to do at the Transfiguration. So they'd seen the Transfiguration, and now they see what the glorification of Jesus actually entails, the suffering. They'd said they were willing to drink the same cup. Then now they were getting to see what that cup looked like. And the reference to the cup recalls the description of God's outpoured wrath in the Old Testament as the cup of staggering. The metaphor of the cup indicates that Jesus saw himself confronted not by a cruel destiny, but by the judgment of God. Now, this is a whole 3 years of theological study, isn't it, Edmund? Just this very subject, the wrath of God, the cup poured out. I don't know if any of you listened to the Bible Project, but I'm just finishing listening to a series they did on the nature of God, and part of that is the wrath of God, and that was 6 hours of podcast. So it's a big subject, and if you're concerned about the wrath of God, and you think, God's just an angry person, I really recommend you listen to those 6 hours of the Bible Project on the wrath of God, because they really contextualize it. But Edmund, would you like to make some comments? I think this is about as far as we'll get in this passage. Well, what are your thoughts on the wrath of God?
Well, I always think about the Pharaoh, where it says he raised him up in order to reveal the wrath of God. And it's actually, you can often put that word in the Old Testament for the judgment, so that people would see how great God was, because this was the greatest human kingdom of the time. And Pharaoh he was seen as virtually a god. So God is saying, I am going to let you see my greatness. And I've raised Pharaoh, the highest person you can look to, the premier person, so that you will see the judgment of God. It's not in the same of, a headmaster with a stick. It's just saying, I want you to know how great God is. You think Pharaoh is the top, but this is the judgment of God. So you get the 7 judgments. So to begin with, Pharaoh, who is this God? I don't know your God. But in the end, he recognizes this is a great God who has great power. So I tend to think of the wrath of God from that end, rather than, God is angry with us.
Yeah, the wrath of God is very intimately tied to the justice of God.
Yeah.
And I heard a fascinating quote from a civil rights lawyer in the US who did a TED talk. It was a great talk. And it just captivated me. He said, the opposite of poverty is justice. Mm-hmm. And it's not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. And in our society, we're used to pretty much getting justice all the time. But in most of the world, you don't. And you only get justice, or something that looks like justice, if you relate it to the right person or can pay the right person. And that most of the time, life and the way you're treated is unjust. And I remember one of my driver in Tanzania, when I go out there, he said to me one time, the difference between the UK and Africa is, in Africa, there's no one looking out for you, no one in government, there's no one cares for you, no one looking out for you, whilst at least in the UK, they are trying to look after you. And so this whole thing about, I see the wrath of God in the light of his justice, that he brings justice to the poor, justice to the widow, justice to the orphan.
Yeah.
Which does mean a judgment on those who abuse the poor, the widow, and the orphan. And it's a wrath against sin, not necessarily against people, but it's a wrath against sin. But this whole subject does polarize people. And I think a lot of it is down to our experience of whether we tie wrath and anger to people we've experienced in our lives. And those people who've had a very bad experience of anger in people in their lives, this impacts them in a very different way to people who have not. And I'm fortunate that my experiences have not been of angry people. Edmund, we're getting to the end. Have you got something to wrap that up?
There is one thing I particularly wanted to talk about in this thing, which is just the next couple of lines further on.
Well, can we do that next week, Edmund?
Yeah, which is a different topic. So as long as we don't miss it out altogether, because I think it's very important.
We'll come back to the start of this passage because it's a very big subject, and we can start again. So if anyone's got any questions on the wrath of God, do you want to ask them now, and then Edmund and I have got a week to prepare?
The one thing I was going to say that remember that one of the central things that the Lord said to me right at the beginning, pulled me up very short in a particular thing only a couple of days after he sort of seized me by the scruff of my Damascus Road, and he thundered at me from the throne, "Do not judge." And that whole thing, when Simon asked me if I would do the first teaching thing with him, I thought, what do I want to get across to the people? You know, Edmund can waffle on for ages, but if I'm being asked deliberately to teach students, what do I want those students to learn out of whatever I teach them? And the first thing is to be people who did not judge, who were quick to give, to forgive, and who were generous. And I think if you sum all that, you've got a pretty loving bunch of people. But a key one there is do not judge. Vengeance is mine, I will repay. And it's very definite for me, and I'm always being challenged by it, that he is the judge, he is the just one. He knows exactly. I may not understand some of the things he does, but he is good. And I am not fearful of his judgment or his justice, even if I found when I died and I didn't land up in heaven. I'm quite happy with that in a sense, because he is a good God, and I'm having written on my gravestone, "Shall not the God of all the earth do right?" He is good, no matter what else happens. And so the whole anger and whatnot, which at times I have experienced, that counterbalances all of that. And I'm glad to say I'm able to separate out those things. So the justice of God is a high ideal for me, and the judgment of God is a high ideal for me, because he knows what he's about. So I try not to go there. That's his business, not mine.
Excellent. Right, guys, have a wonderful week. I am just going to, let me just turn off our recording.